we buy properties with two levers. We're trying to buy it on a good yield. 6.5% is ideal. But by far, the key thing that's going to build our wealth is every year we're going to put our rents up and we're going to lift the capital value of that property.
Figures like what percentage of that would be on the due diligence versus speaking to agents.
But I'm also then just, documenting the lease and all of the important key components in the lease.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Passive Income Doctor. Today, we have a special guest, Phil King, a commercial buyer's agent. A little bit of background about Phil is that he worked his way up at IBM, a sales, very successful career, retired at, I believe, 53 or so, with a very sizable commercial property portfolio. And after retirement, he was approached by many people wanting to learn about commercial property, and hence now runs his own buyer's agency, Engines of Wealth. And he's also written a book also, which we can talk about as well. So welcome, Phil, to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Appreciate you having me on and look forward to answering some of your questions and reaching out to your property investment community. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. So let's start, tell us what you do day to day, if there is such thing as a typical day for you.
Well, as you mentioned, I had a 33-year career in IBM, and I retired at 53. I began playing golf, and it took about 4 months for me to be totally bored with nothing to do. And whilst I'd lived my whole life, I guess, working towards retirement and enjoying the days off, careful what you wish for, because it was just mind-numbing to have nothing to do every day. And look, luckily for me, I had written a book on commercial property to help others invest in commercial retail shops, which was largely the strategy that I followed to build wealth throughout my career. And just a side effect of having written that book, people that read the book started calling me, asking me, that if I could help them find a property. They mentioned that they thanked me for, I guess, opening their eyes to commercial property and really bringing forward the benefits over residential investing. And they were eager for me to help them find a good quality property. So halfway into 6 months into my retirement at 53 and a half, I looked into becoming a buyer's agent and helping people. I got my real estate agent's license and began Engines of Wealth, commercial retail shops, a buyer's agency service, helping, mums and dad investors all the way up to serious investors purchase single strata shops all the way up to neighborhood shopping centers. So a typical day for me really is the search, the hunt for good quality property. So I have a database of about 400 real estate agents that I'm ringing regularly each month. Just asking them, do they have any tenanted retail shops on their books for sale at the moment that they could send me? And if not, do they have line of sight to any that they're about to list? And in doing that, it's my hope that I'll be first to see that property and I'll be able to respond quickly and buy it and get it off the market before it really goes live out to the wider investment market. So looking for stock is definitely one of my, priorities through the day. The other task really during the day is just staying connected with my investors, my clients, just helping them get finance ready, helping them work with their brokers, to make sure that they're pre-approved when a property does come along, that they can access the funding, and we're lockstep with the bank in being able to progress to a sale on a property. So staying really close to my clients, and making sure they're ready. And for some, they're not ready, and it's more of an education process for them, in that they're wanting to learn about commercial property, so that when they do get a deposit together, they know what their preferences are, what types of properties and tenants is their preference. So connecting with clients, definitely a big focus.
Yeah.
Finding product essential in our business. And look, in addition to that, there's definitely the negotiation with sellers. And that's probably the hardest thing, is when I do find a property, I'm balancing. I've got to basically negotiate with the seller on a purchase price that I see value and that I'm happy to buy that property at. Obviously, a lot of sellers, they're obviously, real estate agents are trying to get the tightest, lowest yield possible for their seller. I'm trying to get the highest possible yield for my investor. So it's about that balance and about managing that negotiation process. And that's where I tend to try and educate my clients in how we navigate that process. And it absolutely, there's a strategic formula that we can follow. And that's how we value commercial properties. We can sort of dive deeper into that. But when I do find a property, another major, probably the most time-consuming part of my role is to prepare a full due diligence analysis pack or report on that particular property. And in that report, I'll document and detail what I love about that property, what I like about the area, what I love about the tenant. Have they been there for many years? Have they been there for 10, 20, 30 years in business in that location? How many staff they have? The stability in the business, and, hand on heart, will they still be here in 10 to 15 years? That's sort of what I'm looking at in those reports. But I'm also then just, documenting the lease and all of the important key components in the lease. Is there a personal guarantor on that lease? What's the length of that lease? What's the term? When did it start? When will it stop? Is it a 3, 5, 10-year lease? And what's important is to understand whether that lease is a net lease where the tenant pays all of the outgoings, or is it a gross lease where the landlord is paying the outgoings and the tenant just pays a lump sum rent figure. My preference is definitely a net lease. We could spend 10 minutes on that, but for now we'll move on.
Yeah.
Once I've documented the key components of a lease, I'm then looking the next real critical step, because what that analysis on the lease tells us is how much rent I'm receiving from the tenant. The other key component I need to understand is what are the expenses in holding that property each year. And, I think some investors will know these off by heart. Other investors won't have ever seen them before. So reading my reports is a great way for investors, I guess, to analyze and look at properties the way I do and capture all that information. So, and this is a real competitive edge between the real estate agent and the buyer, because the real estate agent's going to lowball all of those outgoings. They're going to say, well, here's the rates, here's the insurance, here's the body corporate fees, and that's it. And you're expected to just assume that that's all the expenses are. And in doing that, they're inflating the net rent position. So we collect the rent from the tenant, we deduct those expenses, and the figure that we're left with, we deem the net rent position of that property. And then typically we'll apply a yield to work out the value ultimately of that property. So if an agent omits and doesn't disclose several of the expenses, then that net rent figure will be more. So in my analysis and my reports, I capture everything. And you'll be shocked when real estate agents are caught out when I ask them, where's the annual audit? It's a net lease. So, you have to have an independent audit provided to the tenant. That's going to cost $500. Where's the annual backflow prevention test, which is a mandatory plumbing test to make sure that waste doesn't flow back into the sewer? You have to do this every year on your tenancy, and it costs about $600. Have they included that? Most 90% of the time they won't have. So we'll caption for that. Have they allowed for administration and management? The most common answer from real estate agents, the owner's managing it themselves. But that's just them trying to elevate the net rent
Yeah.
and leave out expenses that we know that we're going to incur.
Yeah.
But one of the most common is public liability. Now, there's an article, I've got a website there, Dr. Dan, that investors can go to. It's just one word, engines of wealth, or one word.com, and there's articles written there. And one of those articles is on public liability insurance. People say, well, the building's insured by the body corporate, or the tenant has public liability insurance. But in the event that a customer walks in that shop and goes to turn on the PowerPoint and gets electrocuted, they're going to sue you, the owner of the building, because it was a fault in your building is the reason they got injured. They can't sue the tenant. It wasn't the tenant's business. Like if it was a fruit shop, the tenant didn't leave a banana on the floor. So if they did and someone slipped on it, they'd sue the tenant. But there's instances where the landlord really needs his own public liability insurance policy to cover himself if the tenant directs the lawsuit at you, the building owner. So that's always omitted and not included in outgoings. I always include it in my report and my analysis of the property. There's other things like you'll see the body corporate fees. Sometimes they're just bundled in as a lump sum, and the agent's trying to tell you, you can recover that from the tenant. But I make sure that I split out the administration fee from the sinking fund fee, and we're only recovering the admin fee from the tenant, because under the Retail Leasing Act, there's a good argument to say that sinking fund is not recoverable for the tenant. And for those investors out there who haven't come across this before, what a sinking fund is, effectively, it's savings. It's a quantity surveyor comes out and does a sinking fund plan where they'll say, okay, well, you'll need to replace the roof in 30 years. You'll need to redo the car park lines in 15 years. You'll need to have all of these major expenses, the air conditionings, etc., of the building's cooling towers every 25 years. And they'll get a figure, they'll convert that to an annual figure that they then charge every owner as a sinking fund. But you haven't incurred that expense. Effectively, you're putting it aside to spend it in the future. It's savings. So a lot of tenants won't pay for that. So I make sure that we're treating the sinking fund not as a recoverable outgoing, but just off the net rent. So when you read my reports, you'll see an analysis on the lease. You'll see an analysis on all of the outgoings, so that then there's a financials table in the report where I land on the exact net rent position for that particular property. And that's when, let's say I'm collecting 50 grand in rent, and my outgoings are $15,000 a year that I've accurately recorded. Then the net rent's 35,000. And if I want to buy that at a 6.5% yield to give us a 6.5% return,
yeah,
then 35,000 divided by 0.065 means I'm going to want to buy that building for about $540,000. And that's how I value these buildings, and you can see that in the report. So building those reports is a large part of my week. And I'll probably be taking maybe 2 to 3 days
yeah,
to those reports per property. So a lot of effort in those, and you will be able to see the level of due diligence that I go to in those reports. And it's things like checking that the property's not in a flood zone. When you're working in property every day, and a lot of what I'm buying is in Queensland,
Yeah.
the major problem up there, I can name suburbs, Mullumbimby, Murwillumbah. We've all heard of Lismore, where they say you get a 1 in 100 year flood. We got 3 of those in 1 year,
Mm.
2022. So Ballina is another town up there that you've just got to be so careful. It doesn't just flood in some of these places. It goes to the bottom of the bath. The floodwaters hit the eaves and go over the roof. So these are catastrophic events, and you just don't want to be buying a property that gets wet feet.
Yeah.
So I'm checking flood maps. I'm checking the survey diagrams of the land to make sure there's no easements over the property and that we're buying a clean block. I'm looking at the zoning of the property to see. I definitely have clients that focus and target on development potential properties. And obviously they're going to be freehold properties. They're going to be a little bit more expensive. So that's sort of, I hope I've put some detail into what do I do week to
Yeah.
week,
Yeah.
up to day.
I was
That's
going to ask,
really what
so say, in a given day or given week, like it sounds like like if you had to, rough figures, like what percentage of that would be on the due diligence versus speaking to agents versus, speaking with clients. It sounds like a sizable chunk is on the due diligence. Is that right?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So once we find a really good quality property, um, it's it's game on. We really need to get busy, focused on it, and get that report out. And I will work tirelessly for 2 to 3 days investigating everything, getting copies. I inspect every document associated with that property. I get a copy of the lease. I get a copy of the rates notice, the water bill. I understand what the land tax implications of that property is from the rates notice. I get copies of the body corporate um, levies so I can understand the admin sinking fund, but also I get copies of the body corporate minutes. I want to make sure that there's no special levies planned.
Yep.
I'll tell you a really beautiful building and a really ugly story. There's a property right on the beachfront of Coolangatta called Reflections Towers. There's Tower 1, Tower 2. It's a beautiful high-end resort. But when they built that building, the developer used that non-fireproof cladding on the
Mm.
building. So because of the cladding fire issues that they had in the UK, our buildings out here were tested and checked. And that one of the Reflections towers, don't quote me, I think it's Tower 2, needs to have the cladding replaced. So several of the tenants that own the retail properties have got bills upwards of $30,000-40,000 as a special levy,
Mm.
which is their share to replace that. So I want to make sure I read the minutes of the property to understand, are there any special levies? Has the body corporate had any issues? Are we upgrading the power supply of the building? Is that going to result in a one-off levy to an investor?
And these
Um,
reports, do you request them from the selling agent, or do they sometimes push back or not want to provide it to you, or like?
yeah, they always push back because they're lazy and they probably don't have them. A lot of times they do have them, and they will send them to me. Otherwise, I'll get the body corporate manager's details off the
Mm.
levy. They'll always have the body corporate levy invoice that they've been paying because they've got to prove to you what the admin fund is, what the sinking fund. So off that levy notice, you'll find out who's the body corporate manager, and I often ring that body corporate manager and have a chat to them about the committee and whether it's functioning. Has there been any disputes on the committee? So that I get a good feeling
Mm.
that everyone gets on and it's being run well. And then typically I'll get the details of the chairman of the body corporate. And the chairman of the body corporate will be one of the tenancy owners. So they'll own a unit or a shop in the complex, and I'll be able to talk to that person about, how the building's been running, what's the general condition of the building, is there any water leaks on the roof, is it operating well? So I get a good feeling about that before I recommend properties.
Mm.
And it's not uncommon, Daniel, for me to be a day and a half in to the due diligence, and I make a decision. I don't like this.
Yep.
I think this property's got a few warts and a few problems. I'm not happy. I'm out, and I'll tools down and start the search for a new one.
Yeah.
But if we go all the way, typically that's a property that I personally myself would want to buy. And hand on heart, it's absolutely about my integrity, and me recommending to clients that, hey, this is a great property. I think it's one, and I really do take that quite personally, that I'm looking for properties that I would buy.
Yeah.
And because that's what people are paying me for, is to use my experience to make sure that they're making good investment decisions and that they're buying something that's going to be great quality.
Yeah. And I
A
was
lot of
just
my
curious, I just had a question, the leases, like, are there often would be possible where there might be multiple leases on a property in place, or maybe there's a updated lease? Like, is there a way of verifying the documents is the most up to date? And are landlords or the owners, are they happy to share the mobile numbers for tenants for you to ring, or sometimes they're not happy to, or
well, alarm bells would be ringing if I said, have you got the tenant's number? Typically, the tenant's name and number will be in the lease,
Hmm.
and you can get it on the lease and ring them up. But the most effective way is you drop your little man down out the front of the shop on Google Earth.
Hmm.
And you have a look at the phone number on the shop on Google Earth, and I ring the shop.
Hmm.
And I ask whoever answers the phone, are you the owner of the business? And I can have a chat to the tenant about how they're going. Is your business doing well? Your lease expires in 2 years. Are you happy there? Are you going to renew? Um, is the landlord good? Has there been anything wrong? Does the building leak in the rain? When you ask for something to be fixed, has the landlord fixed it? Is he doing is the air conditioning work? How old is it? Do you know when it was last replaced? So there's lots of information that you can get just by speaking to the tenant. And
Hmm.
I would never buy a building without speaking to the tenant.
Yep.
And in most instances, when we're looking at the properties that I'm recommending, I've actually flown up to Brisbane. I'm buying a lot in regional New South Wales. So Coffs Harbour, Port Macquarie, Tweed Heads, Pottsville, Cabarita. And then as we move into Queensland, I'm buying the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast. Sorry, Gold Coast is a great area. It's a really booming growth area. The investment going in there is fantastic. They're putting the new light rail through, and that whole area is just going ahead in leaps and bounds. So I like the Gold Coast. Brisbane's very, very solid. As I said, we just watch that we don't buy in flood zones. And then I'm buying a lot on the Sunshine Coast. I'm typically not going past the Sunshine Coast. Like, I think the next suburb up is sort of Gympie, etc., because I'm still very, very focused on capital growth and yield. I think we buy properties with two levers. We're trying to buy it on a good yield. And for me, that is trying to get a property around that 6.5% is ideal if it's a good quality property. 6 to 7%, 7% can be achievable, but harder, especially if it's quality. So that's the first thing. We're getting that cash flow being generated out of the property. But by far, the key thing that's going to build our wealth is every year we're going to put our rents up and we're going to lift the capital value of that property. So I'm looking for properties that are going to enjoy good capital growth,
Hmm.
which means, we need population to be growing to achieve that. And that's why these regional areas, Townsville, Mackay, Toowoomba, they just don't have the same strength in population growth, and therefore the capital growth tends to be a bit slower as well. And also, if you endure a vacancy out in those areas, it's harder to find tenants. The economy isn't thriving as it would in those like Gold Coast, Brisbane, and Sunshine Coast regions where you've got exceptional population growth. My son only just last week moved to Queensland, and the number one reason why a lot of our young people from Melbourne and Sydney are heading up to Queensland is purely and simply affordability. A 3 or 4 bedroom house here in Sydney can cost $1.5–2 million. And so you can decide to live here and spend the bulk of your life in that incredible debt, or you can move to Queensland, where he chose to move, and he's going to buy a new 4-bedroom house up there for $600,000. So it's a lifestyle decision for a lot of our young people, but unfortunately, a lot of our older parents are becoming empty nesters with this migration happening to Queensland.
Yeah.
And look, for a lot of mums and dads that have got mature kids that are thinking, they're considering the move to Queensland regions because of affordability and cost of living pressures that's happening here in Sydney.
Yeah.
So, that's why I've been buying a lot of properties at that 6.5% yields in Queensland, because we're going to get that good, strong, solid capital growth, which is very important.
Types of commercial property. I know you're a fan of retail. I mean, obviously these are broad categories as well. Like, so where do you see kind of industrial versus retail versus office space?
Well, look, I don't like office space. And I'm quite upfront about that in the book, but I think there's a big reason. And I was very close to this. I was the national sales manager of IBM Australia. So I was in computing and technology. And there were 2 barriers for companies to let their employees work from home. One of them was a technological barrier and finance. So, for a company to do this, they've got to invest significant money installing, all the switches, the hubs, and the routers, and the bandwidth from Telstra or Optus to actually enable people to dial in. So there's a significant investment in that infrastructure to let your employees dial in. So that was the first barrier. And guess what? When we had COVID, companies had to invest it, and most of them did. It wasn't a choice. The government put us in lockdown. If companies wanted to continue to operate, they had to spend that money. So now it's sunk cost, and they've done it. So that barrier is removed thanks to COVID. The second barrier was just human nature. I don't trust you, Daniel, that you can work from home, because you've got a propensity to go and have a siesta in the afternoon, or go and watch a movie, or go down the beach for a swim. I don't think, and I don't trust that you're going to be working 8 hours a day like you do if I can watch you here in the office. So it's just a human nature trust issue. But again, COVID forced us to bust through that barrier. Employees had to trust their employees to work from home. They had no choice. And I think largely most bosses found their employees to be more productive. People, if they're bored at home, they log on and check emails, they log on and work. They're saving 2 hours a day in commute. People aren't getting distracted by conversations at the water fountain. So I think that barrier was broken down. So I don't think companies are going to move back in to the city and to office space like they did before. But I'm seeing pockets of it, like Commonwealth Bank. I was with my banker for lunch the other day, and Commonwealth Bank have sort of put out a guidance that their employees need to spend 50% of the month in the office. So they're actively trying to bring people back to the office, but only 50%, which means that we're just not going to need the amount of office space that we previously used to. And so that's why I don't like offices. I do love industrial, and I'm buying industrial properties, and my clients will be receiving industrial properties from me. And they've done very, very well, like retail shops
Mm.
have over
And
the
any
last
particular
5
type
years.
of industrial that you like more than others? Like, do you like strata
I
or
like I
freehold
like the
or
perfect match of retail. So
yeah?
if there's a lot of businesses out there that I call large format retail businesses where they rent industrial. So
Mm.
a couple of examples of those, Battery World,
Mm.
it's a retail shop, but they like to be in an industrial factory of 250, 300 square meters. Deco Rug, boating, camping, fishing. These types of businesses are retail, but they Pet Barn, um, Total Workwear or Totally Workwear. I like those ones as well. And you see some beautiful big industrial properties with these gorgeous retail national tenants in them. They're fantastic. Anything medical as well, like uh, a veterinary clinics, radiology centers can be in those
Mm.
larger factory types. And just on the tenants themselves, I spend a whole chapter, so I know we might be running out of time. So I just like to say to people, the book that I wrote is called Engines of Wealth, Commercial Retail Shops. And there's a couple of chapters in there which specifically talk about 10 different tenant types. My favorite tenant types are ladies' hairdressing salons because most ladies are fiercely loyal to their hairdresser. So if I find a hairdresser that's been established for 15, 20 years,
Mm.
odds are they've got a very, very loyal client base. My wife's been going to the same hairdresser for 15 years. So hairdressers tend to be very stable. Another example of that is your accountant. I've been going to the same accountant for 30 years. So we don't typically change our accountants. So if you find an accounting practice in an investment property that you want to buy and the tenant's the accountant, they're pretty stable and safe as well. But there's a whole list. Bottle shops are very good. If we get promoted at work, we buy a bottle of champagne and celebrate. If we lose our job at work, we buy 2 bottles of champagne and commiserate. So we like alcohol, and certainly a lot of Australians are probably finding it tougher with cost of living today, but we definitely like our Chinese, our Italian, and our Thai
Mm.
takeaway. So they typically do well as well, those businesses. So there's a whole chapter on the different tenant types that I love. There's some chapters, some comments there around those tenants I don't like and would never buy.
Mm.
Um, I think we've had 80 odd tobacconist firebombs since the start of
Wow.
the year. Insurance companies won't touch you. It makes it very difficult to insure it if you've got a tenant in there that's a tobacconist. So
Mm.
there's something to watch out for. There's been, the other one's tattoo, and I know tattoo is very popular with young people. Everyone's got tattoos now. But again, insurance companies, for their own reasons, can put your premium up if you've got one of these businesses. So it just heads up for that. Certainly TABs, they're I think closing more than they're opening, because you can go and just bet on your phone now, on your smartphone. You don't need to go into a TAB store anymore. News agencies, I'd be shocked that they're still even around. They're certainly not going as well as I would have some concerns about investing in news agencies. But look, as I say, step one is to read the book. I sell investors, once you've read the book, step two is to join the Engines of Wealth database. It's free, and you can start receiving reports on properties that I'm finding and that I'm recommending. And you can by reading those reports, you'll start understanding what I love about quality properties, what I think a quality property is, what characteristics I'm looking for, how I analyze the outgoings and how I analyze the property's financials. And that'll really help you continue your education in commercial property if you are interested in investing in commercial property. And I think it's a very, very safe, secure asset class and far superior to residential investment. And I talk about that at great detail in the book as to why.
Yeah.
So step one, read the book. Step two, Join Engines of Wealth is no charge. The only time I charge clients is if you actually purchase one of the properties that I'm recommending. And then I just charge a commission like a real estate would for selling your property. So,
Awesome. And I can also vouch that book is very good. And I think it's very thorough introduction, comparing to residential, talking about the different asset types. And yeah, as you said, there's a good chapter in there about particular types of tenants you like and also types that you don't like. Can people find out more about what you do or get a copy of your book?
so you just go to the website, enginesofwealth.com.
Yeah, I'll
You can
put a
order
link
the
in the
book.
description. Yeah.
Yeah, you can order the book from there. And look, I'll make another point is commercial retail shops is the vehicle that I recommend people, and whether it's an industrial factory unit or a commercial retail shop, that's a great superior asset class to build wealth on. And the book is very much an instruction manual on how to build and create wealth leveraging retail shops. So the shop and the asset class itself is just the foundation of how we're going to go about building substantial wealth that one day we can retire on.
Mm.
And the entire reason I wrote the book was so that my three children don't have a garage sale with my life and drive red Ferraris around town. I want them to keep the portfolio of properties that I've built